Welcome back, and obviously my camera would freeze again right as we start. What is going on with that? We'll switch over. I've got the backup camera now, so we can get that one
There we
going.
go.
So we'll try to switch back to the other one, but we have a fun one today because I don't think this gets talked about nearly enough. But what do you do with rookie picks? When you're trading them, how do you figure out what is the right value you should be getting? Or, I mean, I guess even if you're trading them away for veteran players, you still need to know that value, right? You need to know what you are giving up or getting in these trades. And obviously, picks are the hardest thing to gauge because personally, I feel like people get stuck in that like 101 value, but it's not just a 101 value. It changes depending on what that player is. And some years we have that for sure 101, like in 2023. We know who the 101 is in rookie drafts. You need to base that off of the player and not just the pick number. So we're going to get into that. Thomas, how you doing over there in Denmark?
I'm great, man. It's almost dinner time, but always have time to squeeze in a show with you, so it's gonna be awesome.
Love it. Love it. So tell me this. When you are looking to trade your dynasty picks, what is the first thing that you are looking for?
I mean, there's always a simple answer, right? Like you always want to gain some sort of value, but obviously value is also subjective. So there is that. But often when I want to trade my picks, I always or almost always look to acquire a player for those picks because the thing with dynasty rookie picks is that we even though when we have someone like Bishan, it's gonna be an unknown player we're basically drafting, right? Like it's an unknown commodity. We don't know what that player is going to be in the NFL. So if you can acquire someone who's already done it at the NFL level, I really would like to get that player instead of having to take a shot on someone that I honestly don't entirely know what's going to turn out to be.
That's my big thing too, because we've seen the Trent Richardsons and the guys at the top of the Corey Davises that were in line for 101, who's had a at least he's been relevant and been able to be started in multiple years, but didn't live up to the hype of the 101 and what you would expect out of a top 5 wide receiver pick. So I definitely agree with what you're saying. I personally trade a lot of my rookie picks.
Same.
Um, I do not draft a lot unless I'm in a really bad spot and need to completely rebuild. I like to move my picks for the veteran players that I'm for sure can help me out. Now that can burn you, right? Because you can trade a pick and it could end up being Justin Jefferson at 109 or 110
Mm.
and end up being the number one overall value in dynasty fantasy football. But it could also be the Harry that
Yeah, I
goes
was gonna say the
101.
Nikhil Harrys of the world.
So it's very tough to figure out. So when you're talking about this, how do you kind of figure out the value of your draft pick versus the veteran players? Like, what is your number one go-to on figuring out that value before you make the trade?
Personally, I enjoy using dynasty trade calculators, and I'm gonna preface that by saying they are not the end all be all whatsoever. They just help me give or get me to a place where I can sort of understand where are we compared to a veteran player, or where are the rookie picks compared to others. Because when you use a couple of different options on calculators, value charts, whatever, you sort of get a picture. And sometimes, yeah, if you just use one of them, you're not going to get a great picture. But if you use multiples and sort of band them together, you can gain some sort of understanding of where your picks are compared to a specific player. And then obviously using RotoHeat.com, using our Facebook community, our Discord community, there's a lot of people who can chime in over there where they see the value as well. So, and having sort of this wisdom of the crowd, I think, is also a great way to do it.
Yeah, I think it's just very important. I think the first thing that you should be doing if you're serious about Dynasty is ranking these players yourself, right? Like that's the first step.
Absolutely.
Watch the film, see what you think of the player, and then go out and search for other input, whether it's looking at rankings on multiple sites, not just RotoHeat, but get as much information as you can. ADP, which RotoHeat has some ADP coming, and it's going to be we got some awesome stuff in store. But looking at multiple ADPs and getting an idea of where these players are going, and I'm not talking just rookie ADP, I'm talking in the scope of a startup draft. Where are these guys going in relation to veterans? And then you can start putting a value together. You might see some drastic differences, right? Like, I know in our rankings in ADP, we show the deviation between the highest and lowest a player goes. You can kind of see what their movement is like from draft to draft. And it also is not the end all be all, right? Like every draft is different. And it's hard to figure out unless you really know your league and the guys in your league where they are going to be looking at taking specific players. But it gives you that idea of what you should be looking for in trade if it's a 1-for-1, or if you're dropping down and getting like a 2-for-1, what two players can really match up to fit that value. So it takes work, and I don't expect, or I wouldn't recommend anybody just come on to like a RotoHeat video or stream and take what is said as gospel. Like we all know that there's a lot of error in this process. The NFL can't even get it right. So,
For sure.
All of us are going to miss plenty of times, but if you do it and you rank your players and then you go out and you look for that outside info, you can really build a solid base for your drafts and then make the most knowledgeable decisions based off of that. And I think that's my biggest advice to anybody in dynasty leagues is not just taking everybody else's word for it. Building your own value charts for these rookies is very, very important, and then stick to them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to have to live with the picks, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be the one making the final decision on these picks. And I just want to add, like, when you have that entire process, you also want to reiterate on the process. So if you get something wrong, try to figure out what did you do wrong, and then fix it for next time, right? I mean, that's what we do as fantasy analysts. We always try to get better, try to get smarter, and obviously we're going to fail eventually, or from time to time, I should say. But if we can learn from those mistakes and we get a better process going every time, we're going to end up hopefully being right more and more.
That's the thing, right? Process over results. I don't
Sure.
care what you're in. I don't care if you're, what job you're doing or what fantasy sport you're playing or anything. The number one thing is to build your process and then trust the process. That doesn't mean it's going to be right every time, but if you're trusting your process and you're doing the same thing and improving that process, then it's going to end up good in the long run, even though you're going to have some hard misses in between. I mean, if we can talk about misses all day long, I'm sure. And sometimes those are easier to remember than the hits that you've got, right? Like those are the pain. That's the pain that you feel missing on those guys. So let me ask you this. 101, you're trading the 101. How are you determining what you need for that? Because the 101 is a very polarizing pick, right? And every year's different. Some years we have that one for sure prospect that is above and beyond the others. The Saquon Barkleys, the Ezekiel Elliott's, 2023's Bijan Robinson. Those I feel you have to treat differently. Is that how you see it? Or do you see 101? This is a pick, no matter what, that has a specific value? or are you changing that value depending on who is on the board?
Definitely depending on who's on the board. Because when it's someone like Bichon who could be like the running back one next season for Dynasty, you have to take that into account because again, the name of the game is value. So if you're just using the same value every single season for the 101, you're gonna lose out. Some years you're gonna lose out because that player in a year, the player that you take 101 this season could be worth three times as much next season. So you have to factor that in, I think. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think in a year like this year, you have to look at the player and you have to gauge like where's this guy going in startups? What are these picks around them, these veterans, what are they going for? And I think I've seen Bijan as high as the 106 in one QB and like 110, 111 in super flex. And that's like 3 first round pick territory, right? Like,
Yeah, for sure.
and you're like, I don't think you can trade up in this draft in similar ways that you could in past drafts, right? Like, a lot of people aren't going to take the 110 and 111 to move down from the 101, whereas in other years here over the past couple, you could have made that move. Like, there just wasn't any separation between those, top prospects, and the gap between those and the 110s and 11s in those drafts wasn't very different.
Hmm.
This year there's a huge gap, especially in one QB. When you don't have the
Yeah,
QBs up there in one QB, there's a large gap between Bijan and probably Jackson Smith and Jigba at 2. Um, so you would probably have to trade a Jackson Smith and Jigba, or a 102 and probably a 106, 107 to get that. Um, Whereas in past years, you may have done 102 and the 202 and been able to move up just because the
yeah,
difference wasn't as big. So I think it's very, very important to know the players and where they're likely to fall as you're gauging these picks out and adding value to them, because it's so much different if it's
it
Bijan
is.
at 1, and then than it is if, say, it is the N'Keal Harrys of the world, um, or when there's a big question mark and there's multiple guys
Yeah,
that can be at the top. Now, it's real fun when you get multiple Bijan type prospects, but you don't see that very often, right?
mm,
Um, if Justin Jefferson, um, and let's see who else was in that class, CD Lamb, like if they would have been at the top, like battling it out, that would have been fun for that draft.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, so I think you definitely have to figure out who is that player or who is that group of players that could go in that spot and figure out some sort of value in comparison to the veterans so that you can put a proper price on that pick when you're trying to trade it.
especially when you have someone like you said who's so far ahead. Like there's a difference when you have someone like even when there's a consensus 101 like there was with Josh Jacobs basically. That's that season. He was just not that far ahead of the number 2 guy. So even though there might be a slight teardrop, it's not that big of a gap as it is with Bichon down to Jackson Smith and Jigba. So that also factors in the value that you have to give up. And I think that there's also one more thing is like when we look at the NFL, I think if you want to trade away the 101 this season, you have to basically look at the blueprint that the Chicago Bears used in the actual NFL draft, where you need to get someone in return, like a very, very good player in return that you can just plug right into your lineup. And you need several first round picks probably as well.
Yeah, that's always my thing. Like, if I'm really going to trade the 101 with a player as hyped as Bijan, I need to get a proven asset back
Yeah.
one way or the other. I'm not doing the trade just to do the trade and take multiple dart throws. Like, I don't want dart throws if I'm getting out of there. If I'm going to take the dart throw, I'm going to take it on the guy that has immense upside. Not that some of these other prospects don't, but I want to get a piece back that I'm for sure, or as sure as you can be,
Yeah.
is going to help your team, and then have the dart throws on it. So I've eliminated some of that risk by getting that proven asset, and now I can take some other dart throws, and it's not going to hurt me if I miss on, one of the two or even both of the two. If I get two more picks in the trade, it helps alleviate some of that pressure off of that package that I get for that player. So let me ask you this: if you're looking, let's say you're looking at a player and a pick that you are getting for Bijan, what are you looking for? What kind of combination would you be looking for in that trade to trade away Bijan to somebody, or the 101? We're calling it Bijan because it
Yeah.
is.
If I probably want. First of all, I think I want a wide receiver because if I have the 101, most likely earned it, which means my team is not great to begin with. So that's the first step. And then if we're gonna get a running back, we might not get a lot of seasons out of that running back anyway. So I'd probably want a wide receiver who's gonna have longer longevity in the league, so I can actually use him for longer instead of just having a crap team and then a running back who lasts 3 or 4 seasons, right? So I think a wide receiver, and I'm like someone like Jalen Waddle probably, and then a first, because as you said, if Bichon is already before he's played in the NFL like the sixth overall pick in one QB startups, you need someone who's in like the second round of those startups and some picks on top of that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, if I'm doing just a pick and a player, then I'm definitely going to want somebody in that Jalen Waddle range. And
Yeah.
I'm the same way. Like, I feel most teams that are drafting 101, if it's a running back at the top, you should be trading out and getting more
Mm,
value, because you're going to waste 2 years of Bijan's prime rushing attack while in a rebuild. And
yeah.
who knows? I don't care what anybody says. We don't know what running backs are going to make it to years 3 and 4
Mm,
and to a second contract. We just don't know, because one bad hit could eliminate the future for these guys. Or you see what happened to Deonta Foreman, where has an injury and then disappears for multiple years, then
mm,
comes back and has relevancy, but you don't want to be waiting on that. So I do like the idea of getting a wide receiver in that trade, but I also don't mind if you go down and you get somebody like a um Kenneth Walker or a J.K. Dobbins, or a running back in that range that still has a lot of room to improve in value,
mm,
that you could then, mid-season send away in a trade to, get more assets for your rebuild. So if you're thinking of it that way, then you can go about it multiple ways. If you're not the kind that makes a lot of trades, then I would prefer just moving to the wide receiver, maybe getting, another pick or two.
mm,
And if you're somebody that trades a lot and your league's active, then I don't mind if you get a running back in that deal that can gain value, that you can then switch over to more assets via trade mid-season when people see these guys in action, because you know how it goes. It's kind of like the sports card world, where in the off season values are a little bit lower, rookie picks are a little bit higher.
yeah.
And then when the season comes, you start seeing people paying more for these individual players now that they see them in action on the field. And the Brees Halls, the Kenneth Walkers, J.K. Dobbins, I'm sure I'm missing some other running backs that are, were injured last year, are going to be coming back from injury. Looking at a Javonte Williams like later in this year, I don't really
Mm,
like buying him right now, because I think when he misses time, his value is going to drop in season. But then when people see him getting back on the field, then that's when his value starts to range, or to raise. So I don't mind getting those, but you have to be somebody active in an active league to make those moves work. So you got to know your league in regards to that, and you can't get married to those players once you acquire them.
Absolutely. And I think when we're talking about the 101, if you don't if you're not getting that return, like don't just trade it to trade it. That's like one of the most important things. Don't just trade it to trade it. Then take Bichon and then you trade him in season because
Yep.
as you said, his value is going to go up. Then if we have a couple like really good players who get injured in season, their value is going to fall. So you can trade Bichon maybe for two very good players who are just injured and some rookie picks because rookie picks in the season are also worthless because there's so long until the next rookie draft, right? So play like in season players have the highest value, rookie picks have a lower value, and then that flips in the off season because the next big thing, like next big event on the dynasty calendar, is the rookie draft. So that value is completely flipped. So it makes sense to get a player that you can then sell in season.
So let's flip this because we've kind of been talking about how for the 101 you can get a player and multiple picks. Now let's say, even though there's only a handful of players above Bijan, I am not opposed to shooting out to start conversations the 101 for Jamar Chase, the 101 for Justin Jefferson, and seeing what those owners think about, letting them know, like, I'll put some on top of this, but let's get the conversation started and upgrading into a for sure top dynasty asset with a rookie pick that, while has very high upside, is not a for sure thing. And we don't know whether he's going to land. We don't know any of that stuff. There's still question marks. We know Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are absolute insane dynasty assets. I don't mind attempting that because we know rookie fever gets in there. We know running back fever, can take over people. How little can we add to Bijan to get upgraded to a Jamar Chase and a Justin Jefferson? And unlike most years, because of Bijan's hype, I don't think it's out of the question that we can make valid moves here. And I don't mind sitting on the Jamar Chase or the Justin Jefferson for 1 to 2 years while I build out the rest of that roster.
No, that's because they're wide receivers, right? Like, arguably, they're probably the 1 and 2 in dynasty startups for one QB. So, and if we have Bijan at like 6, the thing is, the running back, it's just I feel like the NFL is devaluing running backs, and we've seen this the entire offseason. So in a sense, we kind of have to do that as well, even though they're very, very good assets. It's just we just continue to see more and more shared backfields and all that. So I think if I had Chase and I was getting the 101, I think I need at least another first on top, at least.
Because, well, and that's where the question comes in. Does the 201, because if you have the 101, you probably have the 201. How close is that to getting the deal done? Obviously, it's one pick outside the first round.
Yeah.
But what else could you do? And how far off is that to getting upgraded to one of those top well, I mean, obviously Bijan's a top dynasty asset too, but one of those top wide receiver assets in the league.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close. But again, if I'm the Chase owner, I'm not like I don't think I can just let Chase go for 2 rookie picks. Like we've just been talking about how we need to get the proven commodity, right? So if I have a Chase, I need something back that I know what it's gonna be. So I think I need a rookie pick like the 101, and then probably another like top 10-ish running back or wide receiver.
I do think it's a little bit different because the 101 in this class, like we know who that is and we know their value. So I do think it's a little bit different when it comes to Bijan, and running backs are a lot easier to figure out than any other position that we do, right? Like it's virtually impossible to know whether a wide receiver or a tight end or a quarterback's going to pan out, no matter if they go number 1 overall. But
Yeah.
running backs, typically your top end running backs do produce unless Seattle takes a Rashad Penny in the first round who isn't ready to get on the field because he can't pass block and can't stay healthy. But it is a little bit different with Bijan in there. Now, what if it was like Bijan and Drake London? Do you think that gets the deal done?
I think it could because you have that ascending player in Drake London already. And I think a lot of people had him as their wide receiver one last season. I mean, obviously Garrett Wilson and has leapfrogged him now, because he's like what top 5 dynasty wide receiver now. Um, but I think London and the 101 could do it. You might have to add like a late second on top, early third. But I think it's definitely like we're definitely getting close to where we have a conversation, right? And then at that point, it also comes down to personal preferences.
Yeah, well, we can't get into that. We'd go on forever. We have to
Yeah.
talk about every personality type that's out there, and that wouldn't get the job done on a 1 hour show here. So the next question is there anybody else that can contend for the 101 pick in this year's draft? And I guess it's really super flex, right? Like Jackson's not gonna jump Bijan and one QB, but in super flex, could we take one of these quarterbacks over Bijan and not feel bad about it?
I mean, I not feel bad about it. I don't know. Like that depends, right? Because as you just said, we know more about what running backs are gonna be. We don't really know what QBs are gonna be. But when you have a guy like Anthony Richardson, whose ceiling is basically astronomical, you have to at least consider taking him as the 101 because he could like Bijan could be the best running back in fantasy football. Anthony Richardson could be the best player in fantasy football. So you obviously have to consider that. The thing is with Richardson, the boom bust potential is much higher where we basically believe we know what Bijan's going to be, right? And we don't know with Richardson. But if Richardson goes like top 5 or top 10 in the NFL draft, he's absolutely going to be worth that 101 if you want to take him. And as we just said, like the running back, like you can always take Bijan and trade him at some point. But running backs value generally is already like they hit their peak value very early in their career. Whereas Anthony Richardson could come in, not hit peak value straight away, but 2 or 3 years down the line, he could be worth like almost double of what Bijan could be worth.
And that's why I would argue that you can't take Anthony Richardson over Bijan because Bijan has the value now,
Mm.
and you're going to have to wait on Anthony Richardson for a while. I think if you want Anthony Richardson, I don't argue with that. Like if you want Anthony Richardson instead of Bijan, I do not argue with that, but I would be trying my ass off to trade back to the
Yeah.
102, get a little bit on top of that, and then take Anthony Richardson and let the 102, the guy that trades up from 102 get Bijan with the 101. I think you're burning value if you do pass on Bijan because you've got multiple ways right away to get more value out of him than you do out of Anthony Richardson because I think most people believe in Bijan. I think the field is very polarized on Anthony Richardson. You and I agree that the upside
Mm.
is just astronomical. The Konami code is real. We've seen what Justin Fields did last year, Jalen Hurts did the year before, and Lamar Jackson has done in Baltimore, throwing the ball less and running the ball more as a quarterback. That's what we're going to see from Anthony Richardson early on. I think they're going to, kind of use that Chicago Bears approach from last year. Whatever team takes him, use him as a runner a lot to help open up everything else for him. And hopefully the team that drafts him has more assets than Chicago had for Fields, or even Baltimore for Lamar. I mean, if we get
Mm.
real, like Lamar, the assets early in his career in Baltimore were not good at all, and they haven't been great overall. He's had that one wide receiver and that one tight end. Once they drafted Hollywood and Mark Andrews, but and then got Rashad Bateman, where they were hoping to have 2 wide receivers, but then they traded Hollywood away. So it's real tough to take a rookie quarterback over Bijan because we know their situation's probably going to be shitty. You and I were talking pre-show. The nice thing is probably the top 3 quarterbacks taken are going to be in a better offensive line situation than some of the quarterbacks that have went over the last couple of years, because Carolina's got a solid offensive line. Colts should have a good offensive line. They played very poorly last year, but they've got talent on that offensive line that should be better. And then you've got Houston, who obviously they have Tunsil anchoring that left side, which is awesome. Brought in Shaq Mason. They're improving that offensive line. So their situations when it comes to pressure shouldn't be as bad as we've seen as some of the other rookie quarterbacks that have come in over the past couple of years, especially the guys that went at the top of the draft. Not named Trey Lance, because obviously San Francisco's has been pretty well too, but he hasn't been on the field very much. So that's my argument against Richardson at 101. I think that the ceiling's definitely there. I do think Bijan could be the number 1 overall player in startups a year from now. So I don't think that's out of question for him either. So I'm not willing to eat that value. I would rather trade back if I really want Anthony Richardson and get some more on top of him to give away Bijan at the 101.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the correct way to play it. Like to trade down, acquire some more assets, and then take Anthony Richardson. And so what do you do if you really want Richardson, but you can't trade down, Rick?
I take Bijan and I wait. I'm not going to just because. So my biggest rule for myself, because I'm typically a patient person, but when I get into trade mode, I can talk myself into shit that I don't really want to do. You know what I mean? You know how it is. I know.
Yes,
I bet
absolutely.
95% of people are the same way, right?
Tunnel
You
vision
get into
is real.
trade mode, you get a couple trades done, you get a couple smaller trades done, and now you're like, I'm ready for the big trade now.
Yeah.
And then you talk yourself into taking something instead of being patient. And I feel like patience is the biggest key when it comes to Dynasty. Like you have to realize, for one, if you're drafting, let's say you draft in early May after the NFL draft, you've got a long time before the season starts. Like that deal can still get done in one way or the other, right? It doesn't have to happen in the draft. You can still trade Bijan for Anthony Richardson and something later, potentially, or something else, right? Or you may just say, hey, maybe the CD Lamb owner needs a running back, and you might get a straight swap that way if you prefer CD Lamb, right? I think their value is pretty close to the same.
Yeah.
Or if it's in Dynasty, a Superflex league, you might be able to trade him straight up for a Justin Fields. Like I think they're pretty close to the same value range in Superflex. So there's other options that you have. You don't have to blow up your value in that rookie draft just because you can't get the deal done on the spot. So patience is key. Whenever you're negotiating with somebody, it's normally the first one that cracks that loses, right? Yeah. Like you got to wait it out. You got to be patient and make sure you don't make brash moves just to make brash moves.
Yeah, and I think we're not going to see Bijan's value drop in the after the draft coming towards the season. Whereas Richardson, like if we get stories about how Richardson is not ready to play right now, his value is going to drop a bit. And then that means you're just going to get that little bit extra on top of Bijan if you're trading for him. So I think that's a very good point.
And I think that's a very smart move because there's probably going to be some negative reports about Anthony Richardson, right? He is a more raw prospect, only 1 year of big action in college. And he's probably not going to start right away. I do think that he'll be starting by the time we get to mid-season, because that offense can go the 2022 Bears route and run the ball a shit ton, use him to open up that offense. Like people forget, despite that whole thing, like Fields had the Bears as the top scoring offense for over a month straight and with the weapons that he had last year. Like that's how powerful the running game from a quarterback can be. And Anthony Richardson could, and this is a tall task, but he could be a better running quarterback than even Justin Fields or Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
And while that's a tall ask of a young quarterback coming into the league, like he's just got those physical gifts, but we don't know how his mechanics are going to work out, how long they're going to take to fix that. But the dude's got all the talent in the world. So let me ask you this: what is your number one draft tip to maybe some newer dynasty managers out there getting ready to go into their first or maybe even second rookie draft here in the next month and a half?
I think the overall best tip I can give is don't draft a player that you need. Like if you need a wide receiver, don't just draft a wide receiver because you need a wide receiver. You draft a wide receiver if the wide receiver is the best player on the board. So basically just draft best player available. Draft the guy who has the most value. Like we've just been talking about it. Why draft Anthony Richardson when you can just draft Bijan, right? And then you can always flip that player for the guy that you actually wanted plus something else. So always draft best player available. That's really my number one tip.
I think to add on to your tip, which I agree with, but I think what new managers need to know is when you rank out your players, you should also be like marking tier breaks, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're going to have a lot of players that are real close to each other. And I think it's fine if you have a group of players that are real close to each other that you take the need, right? If all those guys fit in the same group, then take what you need. But if you have one player that is higher than that next tier break, that has players that you need, you take that player that's above them, and then work out trades that way. But you have to make tiers. You have to group the players if you think they're similar, so you know, okay, well, if I have the choice between these four guys, then I need to take the one that fits and fills my need. But if you don't, if there is somebody that's above, like I'm skipping my needs, I'm taking that player that's just a tier above the rest that are available.
Yeah, that's why tiers are so important. Like rankings by themselves do not do as much as when you have them tiered, like you just said, because you might have like, for example, in this, like Bijan's obviously in a class of his own, but then you have another tier below Bijan, and then you have to ask yourself, how big is that tier? And then underneath that tier, like how big is the next tier? And that's also going to help you when you want to trade back, right? Because generally you don't really want to trade down a tier, but if you have a tier of maybe 8 guys, you can still trade back like 6 spots, gain some extra value, and still get a player that you believe is going to be as good as someone that you could take with your original pick.
So I guess the next question would be, if you're in the 101, what is your cap on how far in 2023 you are willing to move down in this draft? Because I think, like, if you're looking at the Bears when they were trading the 101 in the NFL draft, the GM Ryan Poles talked about how they put their value charts together, and then they said, we want one of these players, these blue chip prospects, if we're going to do that. Now, I think they traded out of that because they got a blue chip wide receiver in the deal, right? Because I think the blue chip players probably stop about 108 or something. You probably got 4 quarterbacks and then, a couple defensive. Well, actually, I think all of them are defensive players and maybe an offensive lineman or 2. But what does that look like in 2023 rookie drafts for you? Where is that blue chip prospect tier done that you're willing to trade down to?
Yeah, I think for me, it's generally in one cube. It's generally the 104. Like I think there's a pretty big gap between Bijan and the 102, like we've already talked about, and then that tier sort of ends at 104 for me. And the players are like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jahmyr Gibbs, and then I just love Shaq Charbonnet. the more I watch this guy, I'm like, this guy's going to be a featured back in the NFL. So I think those three are like the guys that I would want to have in return as part of a Bijan trade. And then below them, there's a larger tier, but I would need a lot more to take a player from that tier and trade Bijan away for that.
Yeah, I would agree. Really, to be honest, if I'm trading Bijan this year, I really want to get the 102 in the deal. Like that's where I really want to go because I want Jackson Smith and Jigba. Now, if we're talking about super flex, then I'm probably willing to go back to 105 because I do feel like it's going to go quarterback, and I want to get Jackson Smith and Jigba in there. Now, if I can go back to 2 or 3 and get a Stroud or a Richardson, then I'm willing to do that as well. I think in most years, though, I am more willing to drop to 108, 109 because the players are just closer together. But I do think that that Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then a gap between the next players that I want to take in rookie drafts and 1 QB, even the Gibbs and Charbonnets and but I really do like picking up a lot of extra early second round picks so that I can target guys like Kendre Miller out of TCU in the second round. And then a few of the wide receivers that I want to take shots on in the second round. So I do like doing that a lot. What are you doing with like round 3 and later picks?
I mean, typically I want to throw them in as packages and trades. Like sometimes like you just use it to sweeten a deal, and that's what actually gets a trade over the line. But sometimes like this season, I've been trying to get someone like Jake Ferguson that we talked about last week, just trying to send those 3rd round and 4th round picks for someone who might be something, because we don't know yet if they're gonna add another tight end. But like some of these guys with tremendous upside who are still young and they can help your team for several years, because like we have no idea about these 3rd and 4th round picks anyway. So if we can get someone that we've seen play just a little bit and be good with the limited snaps that they've had, I'd rather have that than having someone I've never seen on an NFL field. Sorry.
I agree with you 100% there. This year I'm kind of treating like I've always been like I won't let a second round pick even get in my way of getting a deal done. But I do think this year I do like going back to like the mid second round with guys that I really like, and then after the 2.6 or whatever, then I'm willing to just throw those in to sweeten the deal as well. But I do like I love Ferguson. I love trying to get him for thirds. If you can get him for 3rd round picks this year, I'm doing it all day long. We're going to get to a question here. Raphael, well, Ken Walker, 1.2 and the 112 for 101 is what I think he was asking. This came back
I believe so.
while we were talking about that. So would you take Ken Walker, the 1-2 and the 112? And we'll just have to assume this is 1 QB. And if you're going to do it in 1 QB, you're probably going to do it in super flex. So would you be willing to make that deal for Ken Walker?
I would.
For Bijan?
I would. I think Ken Walker is not that far behind. Like I think he's a top 5 dynasty running back right now in ADP as well. So I think you definitely have the value there. And then as we talked about, if you can get one of the top 4-ish picks in 1 QB, like you said, you just want the 102. You get that in this deal. Then you get the 112. And I think if you need to, you can flip Ken Walker probably for like 2 firsts or very close to 2 firsts, right?
You should get 2 firsts for Ken Walker.
Yeah, exactly. Like so, all of a sudden you have 4 first-round picks here, and I think that's more than enough for me to actually let someone like Bijan walk from my team.
Yeah, I love Ken Walker as well, and basically, I'm looking at it as I'm getting Ken Walker, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, and then whoever I decide to take a shot on at 112. And I could trade Ken Walker and get either some 2024 firsts and continue to keep my team down so I get better
Exactly.
draft picks in future years just because I don't have the talent on there right away. I can stick Jackson Smith and Jigba on my taxi squad so he don't help me, right? And build the value of my future first, because I think that's what people forget a lot too.
Yeah.
If you make that trade and you do bring in a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, upgrading, or quote unquote upgrading from Bijan to one of them, like you're adding a for sure point scorer to your roster if they're healthy. And excuse me, it makes your team that much better. I would like to stay at the bottom of my league for the 2 years if I can't make the full jump.
Yeah.
From last to playoff contention. So you're making your team worse at the same time. Daniel wants to know, do you guys trade for picks with the intent of gaining value and trading before the draft? May have talked about it and I missed it. So I think what he may be asking here is, are we trading for, let's say, in season future first round picks? So right now, are we trading for 2024 first round picks with the intent of when we get to this point next year, they have way more value and we can send them out for veteran for sure players rather than taking the shots on them. But we're getting them at the discount and then we're selling them closer to their peak to get better veteran players. Is that something that you actively do?
Yeah, I do. I think, as Daniel sort of alludes to here, the name of the game again is value. Like, you always want to try and gain value. Obviously, you might lose a trade here and there because you don't know how that player's going to turn out, all those things. But generally, I try to trade for picks in season and then trade for players in the off season. Obviously, there's going to be, like, you have a chance to win, so you're going to acquire some veteran players for some rookie picks because you want to win it now, right? But generally, I try to do the thing where I trade for picks in season because that's where their value is at the lowest, and vice versa. I try to get the players in the off season where their uh, value is lower as well, and where, especially
Right, because
because
it switches in the off season from January till May, or roughly May, whenever the NFL draft is, your dynasty draft picks are worth more than they should be, right? They're inflated.
And it just continues to rise. Like, the closer you get, it just starts creeping up. So
that draft, during your drafts, when they're worth the most.
Exactly.
But at the same time, your veteran players are perceived as less value during that time. So when you're making those trades and you're getting those picks a year early and then flipping them around rookie draft time, you're using the strength of both of those tendencies, the tendency for rookie picks to be worth a lot less a year earlier and worth a lot more a year later, as with players being worth way more in season than they are out of season. You're hitting both of those tendencies and gaining a ton of value in doing that if you can do it. Again, this is one that I think you have to know your league. If your league is active enough, then you can make moves like this. But if you're somebody that doesn't like drafting the dart throws, the beautiful thing is if you get stuck with them, you still got them at a discount. If you don't move those picks and you have to draft the players, at least you didn't pay the now price. Exactly. You paid the last year price.
Yeah, and it's like the whole, like, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? Like, he just shot up the draft boards. People were taking him at like 102, 103, and 1 QB. A year later, you could get him for like late first round pick. So I think that's what you have to do. You have to look at the value. And again, like, some of the tips that we were talking about, if I had to give one tip, I think another tip is, like, don't give landing spot too much credit. Like, I know you're so much into this point as well. Like, the talent is going to be constant. Like, if you get a talented player in the draft, it doesn't really matter where he ends up. Like Ken Walker, he was behind Rashad Penny last season. Everyone knew that Ken Walker was still going to take off. Maybe not in year one, but later on he would. So, like, draft for talent, don't draft for landing spot.
There is so much to be said about this because, one, people don't realize, like, a lot of our running back ones have come out of like shit situations. When you think
Mm,
about Carolina with CMC after they drafted him, not a good team, bottom of the league, but the number one fantasy asset on that team. Saquon Barkley in New York with the Giants, running back one overall one year
mm,
with a shit team. Last year, the Bears just crushed the rest of the league in rushing as the worst team in the league.
yeah.
So fantasy points come out of all that, and people get too tied to the situation. Think back AJ Brown going 109, 110
Mm,
in rookie drafts because he went to Tennessee. Well, the
yeah.
NFL changes fast, right? And good players are going to win out.
Yeah.
CEH goes from the 109 in rookie drafts, 110 in rookie drafts, to top 12 overall in startup drafts because he was drafted by Kansas City. Mecole Hardman, huge value jump because he was tied to Patrick Mahomes. Sky Moore last year because he was tied to Patrick
Mm,
Mahomes. We see it go both ways, and the NFL changes so fast. Talent's what wins out, right? Situation can benefit a player for a year, maybe two, but for the long run, it doesn't. Think about the Cameron Merediths of the world that had one great year in
mm,
fantasy and then didn't show up ever again
yeah.
because they were forced the ball. That's what you get into when you start making too much of a landing spot, because sometimes even Andy Reid can't turn a turd into a number one fantasy asset at running back in CEH. Not that
Yeah.
he's a turd. I do think that he's better. It is very interesting that he wasn't used catching the ball as much as we thought he was going to,
Yeah.
but also played on a freaking phenomenal LSU offense in college where nobody was worried about CEH. They were not when they were in their team meetings that week, they weren't saying, "Man, we got to stop that CEH." They were saying,
No.
"Oh shit, we got to stop Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow."
Yeah, and even Terrace Marshall back then.
Terrace
Like you
Marshall,
just had
yeah.
the three-headed monster at wide receiver. It's like, okay, if we could just limit them to 5 yards a pop with CH on the ground, let's do that. Like,
Oh, I didn't even answer this guy's question.
oh,
JP says traded the 101 for ETN and Andrews. I guess it's not really a question.
mm,
Um, are you fine with that? Getting Mark Andrews and ETN for
I
the
think I want
101?
more, honestly. That's where I'm at. I think, but then again, like I've always been not as high on ETN as a lot of other people. I think if you really love ETN and you just believe he's gonna be really really good, I think you can make a case for this. But I think generally I would want more than these two players, especially because like if Lamar he leaves Baltimore, we have no idea what happens with Andrews.
I'm pretty sure Andrews stays pretty relevant there because they don't have much else in
That's
the
true.
passing game. And if Rashad Bateman can't stay on the field, then Andrews and Isaiah Likely are really the only two options that I love there. But I'm also not the highest on ETN. I don't know that you're going to get a lot more from most people in this because I think the general public are higher on ETN than you and I are.
That's fair.
Um, and then, but I'm not like, I don't want a tight end though. Like, give
No.
me a wide receiver of similar value in that spot. This is the debate. We talked about it a little bit earlier when we were talking about Richardson and Bijan. My argument against when people wanted to take Kyle Pitts over Chase wasn't that I didn't like Kyle Pitts. Like, I think Kyle Pitts can be really good,
Mm,
but your tight end is very rarely ever going to be a top 5-6 asset in Dynasty. Whereas if you can get another player in that spot that has the chance to elevate to that Jamar Chase level, to that Justin Jefferson level, I
mm,
want that upside in the deal rather than not.
yeah.
So that's where I'm at with this. I don't think it's horrible. I don't
No,
think it's
and I
horrible at
think I
all.
think if you equate it to draft picks, right? Like ETN could probably go for two firsts
Yeah.
in some leagues, and Andrews could go for at least a first too, right? So
Yep.
I think if when you look at it that way, this trade makes sense because getting three firsts for the 101, I think is fine as long as it's maybe not the back end of the first all three picks.
The legend RotoHeat Sully in the house says, some of my most successful rebuilds have been accomplished by hoarding draft picks in season and then turning those picks into proven talent in the off season. Love that approach. Yes, it is big.
Heck yeah, Sully.
It is big. It is big to do that. It takes patience. You have to be
It
patient.
does.
You cannot, like, if you're treading a fine line. If you like, let's say it's March, you trade for 2 or 3 2024 firsts, and then you get into October and you're like, oh, now you want to trade them. Like, you're not, like, you're taking a way bigger risk at that point because they haven't reached their top value, and you're paying more for that asset that's playing right now than you would in the off season. So, you have to be patient with it, stick to your plan. Now, obviously there are situations where players, you might have 2 or 3 players on your roster that explode way more than you thought they would, and your team's in a different spot and now you're trying to make some moves, or other teams have had injuries that have dropped below you. Like, there's a lot of scenarios that can change that plan, but you want to make sure you're honest with yourself before you go changing your plan. And then Sully says draft capital over landing spot. I don't necessarily disagree with this, but I do to a certain extent, because the NFL is now moving off of players faster than they ever have in the history. Landing spot and draft capital draft capital is important, but I don't think that just because you're drafted high now, you're guaranteed to get 2 to 3 years of experience. If you are really bad early on, you can get pushed out the door really fast early on. And I just don't think it's as valuable now as it was 5-6 years ago.
Agree. And I think, like, we talked about it backstage as well, like the whole draft capital thing, it's like a thing, but it's not a thing if you have decent pieces around you. Like, take Zach Wilson, the guy that we talked about, right? Like, he had a lot of very good pieces around him, and he still failed. And at that point, you have to move on, especially because of the position that he plays. Like, you can't just let a guy sit there and, unless you have Aaron Rodgers, like, you can have your backup QB sit there and marinate for like 3 years. But with a Zach Wilson, you can't just do that. Like, you saw him play horribly last year with players like Garrett Wilson, decent offensive line, Breece Hall, some other decent running backs in the mix and stuff like that.
Yeah, and think about if we go back a year prior to the year Lawrence, Fields, Lance, Wilson, and Mac Jones went, 4 of those 5 quarterbacks, there was already questions about whether they were their team's quarterback going into the future. Trey Lance right now is a question mark because of Brock Purdy. Last year, Mac Jones, who was, a lot of people were super high on after a rookie year, was in serious jeopardy of losing his job to Bailey Zappi. Justin Fields, this offseason, it was questioned whether the Bears would trade him or the number 1 pick. And who was the other one? Oh, Zach Wilson, obviously, has. I mean,
and arguably Trevor Lawrence, like, because of Urban Meyer, people were like, this guy might not even be that good. Like,
well, yeah, but I think most people that actually know football, were like, this is a terrible situation. And I think they gave credit to even Zach Wilson his rookie year and Justin Fields early on. And obviously Trey Lance has had some injuries, but I think Trevor Lawrence, most people were like, I mean, this dude was, I think most people knew he was going to be pretty good and knew that Urban was just terrible. But I don't disagree that draft capital gets you on the field, but I just think that the NFL, views it a lot differently now than they did in the past. And it can get you on the field early. I think that's why Anthony Richardson's going to get on the field early, but it doesn't mean you have multiple years of not producing like it used to. Like, if you were a first a lottery pick, a top 10, 15 pick in the NFL, you typically got multiple years. We've seen, even Leatherwood was a first round pick and was released the next year. So I think that it's a lot different now than it was in the past. I don't think you're guaranteed that. I think teams are putting guys on the field that can produce if they see that, and they don't care if it's a seventh rounder or undrafted rookie that they put in there. If they're producing and you're not, you can lose your job. And I think Zach Wilson's a great case study on that, and it kind of started with Josh Rosen in Arizona,
Mm.
um, where it's just the NFL's moving so much faster, and they will move and bring in new people if it is going to make their team better. That's not always the case. Sometimes we'll still see some guys get longer leashes than their counterparts, but it is. I just think it's a lot different in that regard than it was in the past. Okay, we need to wrap this up with our weekly pick from Price Picks. And we are talking about Jalen Hurts with the line of 3,675.5 passing yards on the season. If we get into his 2022 stats, he had 306 completions on 460 attempts, a big improvement from his year before. Went over 3,700 yards with 22 touchdowns and 8 yards per attempt. So the big question is, does Jalen Hurts continue his ascension in 2023 and go over that 3,675.5 passing yards on the season? Thomas, what is your answer?
I'm definitely going the more. Honestly, I think it's a very good line because it's very very close, but I think it's gonna be more, and I think so because we've just seen Jalen Hurts continue to improve every single season. Like 2 year in 2021, he had like 3,144 yards. This season, he's improved that about 600, and we've also seen his yards per attempt go up. And he's still a young quarterback. He's still not, especially when it comes to passing the ball. So he can continue to make strides, and he has a very very good offensive line that he can get protected by. He has two very very good wide receivers, like
Great
two
tight end.
top 15 wide receivers, a great tight end. And when you look at who's the running back now, Rashad Penny, like, do we actually believe he's going to stay healthy for an entire season? Probably not. I
It's
mean, the odds
unlikely.
are he's not, at least.
It's
So
unlikely.
yeah, exactly. So odds are that they're going to throw the ball even more next season. So I'm taking the over here.
I agree. I agree with everything that you said. This guy, and out of all the players that are playing right now, this player is probably the one that I've pulled the fastest 180 on. I was not a fan when he
Same.
came into the league. Was not a fan after the first season when he started a few games there in relief of Wentz at the end of the season. Obviously, the running and everything was great. And then after year two, I started digging into some of the numbers, seeing that he was actually way more accurate than people thought.
Yeah.
He does have some bad misses that kind of make it look worse than it is, but he was like ninth in on target passes. But his
Mm,
wide receivers, when it was a rookie Devonta Smith that struggled to get open early in the season, got way better in the second half of the season, and Jalen Rager and Travis Fulgham and Greg Ward and
yeah.
all that shit, it
Zach. No,
was
wait.
not good.
Yeah.
And then last year, he just took off with the great wide receiver core that they had built, bringing in A.J. Brown. I agree. I think we see Jalen Hurts' first 4,000-yard passing season in 2023. I am also going over on the Jalen Hurts Price Picks. Love the line under 3,700. Barring injury, I do not think he goes backwards from where he was in 2022.
Mm,
I like Jalen Hurts. I'm taking the over. We got more. So 2 weeks we've agreed. Last week we did not. You took the
yeah.
over on Henry. I took the under on Henry. We're back to agreeing in week 3. Prize picks. RotoHeat.com/prize picks helps support the channel. You get a match up to $100. We appreciate the support. But a couple things here just to end this. Sully says, agree with that for sure. My point is the risk factor doesn't change just because you land in a good offense. First round picks get a look and longer leash. I do agree that they get a longer leash than a 7th round pick. I'm just saying that they don't get the leash that they used to get. I don't think you're insulated as much for multiple years of opportunity as you used to be. Obviously, the guys that go at the top of the NFL draft are going to just be the better prospects anyway, right? Typically. Sometimes we see some random weird stuff.
Unless you're N'Keal Harry.
Or, well, right. But I mean, those picks, even if the first wide receiver didn't go till the 2nd round, like Harry still would have had that rookie value, right? Like, because he didn't drop like Kelvin Harmon did. But yeah, so if Hurts stays healthy, he should crush this. He exceeded this line on 15 starts last season. I agree. I love it. Thomas, I think we're starting to get our groove after here going into week 3, getting a little bit of flow together. Even though I'm the asshole American over here, you've treated me very respectfully over our first 3 shows. I love it. We will be back next Thursday, noon Eastern. We are talking about season-long redraft roster construction. I can't wait to get into this one because I think we're gonna have some.
It's gonna be so much fun.
Differing points of view on some of this stuff. I'm excited about it. I love it.
Too.
Great job, Thomas. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. Hit that like button and subscribe on your way out. We will see you next week.
See you next week, guys.